A very good day. This is the kitchen of Amsterdam Books. We have now before us the John McAfee tapes. And we've got the author Mark Eglinton here. We're also with Ralf Dekker, who is the treasurer of our company, and Chhay Lin Lim, who is our tech officer. We're here together to have an exciting conversation. We hope you enjoy it. And if you do, subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends so other people can watch this as well. Mark, a tremendous welcome to you, especially, but also to the others, of course. And we have here this book, this wonderful book that can change your life.
Yeah, it has changed mine, and thanks for the introduction. Great to be part of the first podcast. It's a real honour for me to have this edition of the book published by Amsterdam Books, and I'm very pleased to see that all the people who've read it here get the same thing that I get out of it, which is, you read this book cover to cover and you can change your life and live more like John McAfee did. So that's where I am with it, and I'm looking forward to people enjoying it.
Yeah, what does that mean? Live your life like John McAfee did? Because it's true, and that's also why I'm so proud. This is the very first international book that we're publishing. You start reading it, you can't stop.
Correct.
And that's because every line that he speaks is deeply honest. It's heartfelt, and it's extremely original. He has a way of living that I don't think any person has ever lived remotely the kind of life that he has.
I agree. I mean, I've said it myself. I think it's the craziest life ever lived. And if someone has lived a crazier one, I'd be interested to make contact to write their book with them. But as far as I know, this is the craziest life ever lived. And I had the challenge of distilling all this down to 280 pages, which wasn't easy because this is a guy who lived for 75 years, did all these things, and I had to find the most important stories, the messages, etc., to make this something that somebody could pick up, digest, and take something away from. So,
but the weird thing about him is that I think most of us have come across elements of his life.
Yeah.
For example, the antivirus thing. Most of us have had at some point in our lives the antivirus McAfee software or encountered it. But also the connection with what happened in Belize and being a fugitive at some point and very famous for that and being on the national news everywhere. People have come across snippets of his life, but not the whole story.
I think you're right, and I think it's a generational thing as well. I think some of the older people who are around who are reading the book probably do know him more from the antivirus days. Some of the younger people who've perhaps picked up the Showtime documentary you're talking about, Gringo, are only aware of the Belize stuff. And, then you have a whole raft of people in between who've maybe heard about some of the things he was doing before that. So I think John has got multi-generational appeal. No matter who you are, there's an aspect to his life I think is going to interest you. And for me, who's right in the middle of that age group, I just loved it all.
Yeah,
I still do.
Yeah, let's take it back a little bit to the beginnings of John McAfee and how you got in contact with him, because how did you know him in the first place? What was
I was one of these people who knew elements of the McAfee life. I'd heard of McAfee antivirus. I did read the newspaper stuff when he was on the run in Belize. I mean, who couldn't read that stuff? It was all over the press. And I thought, who is this guy? This guy, is this the same guy? Was what I thought, which is, I think, something a lot of people have felt. How did this guy go from being a tech guy to being on the run in Belize? And you just had to read the stories, and you soon discovered, same guy, absolutely off the rails in later years. And I was just fascinated. How could this be the same person? And the next question was, how can I get in touch with him? And as you know, this day and age, you can get in touch with people at the touch of a button, Twitter messages, and there he is.
And we have an image of that first Twitter message that you sent, right? We can show it.
Yeah, absolutely. I can show you some of that dialogue, and some of it wasn't very pleasant at the beginning. He was very suspicious and very sort of non-trusting of what my motives might be, and this continued into Skype calls soon afterwards. But again, with John, once John trusted you, he stuck by you, and it took us a few days.
Well, I can imagine that a lot of people have tried to talk to John and also to write a biography of John. Why do you think he chose you?
I think, they have. I mean, he told me. There's been a few people tried. They're all naive. Nobody believed my stories. And I think, honestly, there's a couple of reasons. I think he liked the idea I was Scottish. He was born in Britain. That appealed to him.
Yeah.
I think he liked the idea I was a bit older than some of the people he'd spoken to before. But also, I just gave him no bullshit. I didn't lie to him about what I thought the business possibilities were or what I could do. I just told him who I was, why I wanted to do it, and why I think it would work. And I think he saw that at a time in his life where he wanted to make it happen. You know, this was 75 years old. Last will and testament of life.
Because he was on the run at that time.
He was in hiding.
He was on a
having
boat,
been on
he was
the
in
run.
hiding. Nobody knew where he was, really.
Yeah, he was under strain, and that was obvious to me, even in very early conversations. I could tell this was a guy who was looking over his shoulder in a real sense and a figurative sense. And I sensed an urgency. This story needs to be told, and I thought this is a once in a lifetime chance for me. And I did feel that, and I'm glad I took it.
And what is the response from the McAfee team when they read the book?
Well, it's difficult to know who the McAfee team is. There's so many people that surround.
Was he
John.
even on the McAfee team?
Well, the only person that really matters to me is Janice, his wife, who was involved in our conversation. She was it started off that she was meant to be the liaison in terms of me making contact with John. That went out the window after 12 hours. He just contacted me directly. There was no communication with Janice, but she was on the calls. Sometimes she would always come in and say hi and all of that. So I really wanted her to be on board with what I was doing. And my feedback from her was that for people who don't know John, this is a great way to understand the man. So what anyone else thinks, I'm not sure, but Janice, the important person, liked it.
Yeah, I liked the multi-generational part of it, because I joined the computer department of Amro Bank in '82, and that was still 70s software, 70s situations, where the distinction between hardware and software was still vague. Data communications didn't exist. At least not in the normal corporate space. And also already there he was one of the heroes, because he was a very, very early top technician. And these guys were seen as magicians by the rest of the organization. Nobody understood what they were doing. I remember in the bank, the senior bankers were in awe looking at these technicians who ran this extremely expensive computer environment. Huge computers as big as a room, which could do what your watch can do today and even less.
Yeah, exactly.
So these guys were engineers with screwdrivers and at the same time programmers. And it's very, very rare to see people who are still on top of the current technology as John was from that day and age.
Yeah, I think there's another element to that. I think a lot of these people attracted images of being sort of geeks. The early computer specialists were geeks. In fact, John talked about a couple of them in the book. It's some of the best stories in there about these guys. But John somehow managed to be a genius and the sort of anti-geek. He was the opposite of a geek. He was the only person I know that managed to pull those two things off. He was kind of like a gunslinger type of guy, but at the same time a mathematical genius. So I think he was an outlier in that respect.
It's incredible, the story when he has this company at some point in his life, and he has these computer geniuses working for him, and there's some virus, and some CEO is completely panicked, and they drive off to his house. So John McAfee on the wheel, and then his friend there, you describe it. And that CEO is completely panicked, so much so that they have to bring him to quiet, because otherwise they can't work. And John starts talking about his children who are in a picture in his room somewhere. So how are you? How many children do you have? That kind of thing. So he quiets down a little bit, and then on the way back, the geek says to John, "How did you know that you had to talk about his children as if it was a computer game?"
This geek just did not exist in the real world. It's a funny image what he describes. This mobile antivirus service always makes me think of Ghostbusters or something. This vehicle with computer stuff strapped to the side, McAfee driving it across the country. But that's generally what he did. And that's indicative of the demand that there was for this stuff at that time. People didn't know how to fix things, and John did. So it was a matter of, as you say, someone in a real panic, help, and he'd go out there and fix it with one of his specialists with him. It was a great time.
Yeah, but it was a relatively common picture that the big bosses of business, they understood that they were fully dependent on computers, but they didn't understand the first thing about it.
Are you saying this from experience?
So, yes.
Yeah.
No, it's true. That whole thing has changed now, because you take all these technology layers for granted now, but then you had to go to the actual physical wiring and up again in order to make things work. So these guys were indeed magicians to a certain extent.
Yeah, and he was at the very beginning of that. So he lived the computer age, the beginning of it, and the building of it, and so that makes him a fantastic man just to understand his life, because it makes you understand the current period of time.
Absolutely.
But he also has worked for the CIA at some point, and he has a tremendous insight. It's also in the book, in the workings of the deep state, and how the deep state is much more powerful, in fact, than day-to-day politics.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the conversations we had, and I went into the conversation not in a position of complete naivety, but certainly, I was sort of in the middle. I thought, there probably is big bad people above governments that we don't know about, and who are they? But John explained to me in very simple terms that any president in the US, and I guess that extends to any country, is just a puppet. They're put there to do the job in a sort of transient position for 4 years, and every directive comes from people above that person. And he described the need-to-know concept, which I found fascinating. Even a president that there is certain information that a president does not need to know, and that, when you consider that in terms of what happens in the world with various things, that changes your viewpoint in terms of who's running the world. So John knew these things, and he had a unique insight because he actually worked for the CIA on a black program in the early 80s. So he'd seen it from the inside, albeit he couldn't say too much.
But he also says in the book that in the 80s, he was working on a black program, secret program, of technology and things that were implemented actually 20 years later.
Yeah, that's
and then
frightening.
He says, in a very frightening passage in your book, he says they're probably working on things now that won't be revealed until 50 years later.
Correct. Which is frightening.
That's chilling.
Yeah, I agree. And it gives some insight into what level of forward planning there might be being put in place in areas that we know not what these areas are. I mean, John didn't tell me what the specific program he worked on was. He didn't give me any clue as to what it was, but it could be anything. Could be surveillance. It could be anything. And it's a matter of what is coming down the line. We don't know.
Yeah, and I think it did change my view about politics. The book changed my life in many respects, in the way I look at life. But if a guy like that understands immediately that the COVID situation is a scam, and he writes on his Twitter, whatever you do, don't take the vaccine.
Yeah.
Do you think those two are related? Do you think because of his understanding of the workings of secret services, he was able to see through the COVID?
I think there's an element of that. I mean, John did, to be clear, in some of our Skype conversations, he acknowledged that COVID was real. There was no question about it being real.
You can get sick from it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, you could be sick. There was no question about it whatsoever. And I remember asking him in one of our Skype things, what do you think this is? Is it a trial? Is it a leak? Is it pangolins? Is it bats? What is it? And he said, it's a trial, 100%. And I remember thinking, oh, okay.
And a trial of...
A trial, let's release this into the world and see what happens.
Did he also point us into a direction of who were behind it?
No, he did not. He merely put out there, this is a trial, 100%, as if to say to me, this is all you need to know. And I was like, okay, interesting. Thank you for that.
And why do you know why he was so opposed to the vaccines immediately? And I think he even wrote to you a message that we can show.
Yeah,
he said, it's not about the virus.
It was a series of statements, and at the time we were talking about business aspects of the book, and I was talking about COVID, and he said, "Forget COVID, forget something else," and we'll show the message. And it was as if to say that I was looking at the wrong thing. My focus was on the wrong thing, and this was John's way. John liked to present a little bit of smoke and mirrors when it came to things. And it's one of the points I made about the book in general. John was not always explicit about what he said about things. He much preferred readers to make up their own minds. And indeed, when he was talking to me, he wasn't giving me all the information. He was trying to lead me into thinking for myself. And I think that's one of the big takeaways for the book in general, that you read it and you want to take away what you see there. And the signposts are there. and there's a couple of others we can talk about. But John sort of laid out a trail of breadcrumbs for people to follow.
But then you didn't talk in depth with him about his opposition to the vaccines.
We didn't get into that conversation.
He knew it way before we got the data that showed that the risk is higher than what it solves, and so he knew it immediately.
Yeah.
That puzzles me, but he was so intuitive about so many things.
Absolutely, and also, I mean, on a separate issue, he was still in touch with people within the CIA. On according to him, on both sides of the CIA, there was he claimed to have friends who were helping him in the CIA, advising him of potential threats, and equally people who were trying to pursue him. And there was this odd sort of relationship, which he described as schizophrenic, with the CIA, where some wanted to get him and some wanted to look after him. It's possible he had inside information of some kind, although he never told me explicitly.
What I like is that there's so many layers in that book. I mean, you can simply read it as a fascinating adventure, and there's lots of adventures there. And so, from that angle, it's a great read to start with. But then underneath, there's all sorts of notions that the breadcrumbs you mentioned.
Yeah,
so there's more to it.
Yeah,
and that's the nice part. So the deep thinkers find enough of what they like as well.
Yeah,
but also the guys who simply want to sit on the beach and read a nice book.
Yeah,
it's great for that as well.
Yeah, I agree.
So from that respect, I think it's one of the few books that have that.
Yeah, I mean, that was the intention. I wanted it to be a light beach read for somebody who just wanted a wild adventure, because let's not forget, this life was a wild adventure, and it would be a real shame to suppress that with too much deep thinking and sort of philosophy and academia. But if you want those levels, they're there. As you say, you could read it on two different levels. You could read it one day after the other and get two completely different things out of it. And I'm very pleased that people get that from it.
There's one thing that so I was reading it again, and because I love this book so much, I just open it at some page and I realize I can't really stop, and then I go somewhere else and I just walk through it a little bit because I've worked.
Would it be a toilet read for you?
I have Ulysses, James Joyce's Ulysses on the bathroom. That's my. One of the things that you do describe but you don't really pursue, but it's very interesting, I think, is John McAfee's relationship with women, because he was obviously, and I think I have encountered one or two people in my life who were at that level of attraction, that he could basically with a tip of his fingers attract any woman he would ever meet. Yeah, I have met those Casanovas before. Incredible. They walk into a club and they literally pick one or even two women just from the side, and they go to the bathroom to have sex like that. It exists. These people exist. He was like that, I think.
He was, but he also understood, and there's a very good story in there, but he understood what it was he had to present to people in certain situations. And he told a good story about going to Brazil, where he walked into the bar first night and said, "Oh, well, all these women are like Greek goddesses, and the problem is that all the men are like Greek gods." So I realized very quickly what I was up against. And I said, "So what did you do?" He said, "Well, I had to play upon the strengths that I had. I was a wealthy American with a lot of money, and I had to use that as my playing card, and that was successful." But it wasn't like, I think he did have the attraction aspect that you had, but he was also somebody who thought about it in terms of what is it that I need to play upon in order to be attractive. Because he knew that he couldn't compete with a 21-year-old Brazilian Adonis, indeed. So, John understood that, and he did it very well, and his life was littered with relationships.
Yeah, but also extremely complicated ones. I mean, who marries with a woman who has tried to kill you twice? I mean, that's an insane concept, isn't it?
That's Janice, right? His last wife.
I mean, how does it work at the beginning? I mean, you would say that trust is the basis of these things, but he didn't trust her at all.
Did he ever explain you why he married Janice?
Yeah, I mean, they met when he landed in the US from Belize in a bar. They had a conversation outside a coffee shop. She wanted probably to rob him, he thought, and he said, "Not tonight, but I do want someone to cuddle. I don't want to have sex. I would just want someone to cuddle. I want a nice fresh bed sheets and someone to cuddle. And from there, they were kind of together. And I don't think there was any great discussion about we're going to get married and it's going to be like, it was just like, well, here we are. And from there, they were never apart. And it did get complicated because John never did fully trust Janice. And I said to him, why not? And he said, well, I don't trust anyone, not even myself, which was quite a sort of cryptic thing to say. Yeah. But it did give some insight into how the man thought. But, I just think that John thought, well, here, I didn't intentionally get into this relationship with Janice, but here we are. Chaos threw us together.
But she tried to poison him with red poison. He saw through that. No, that's come on.
Yeah, John was fine with it. I think he was just somebody who looked at the situation and thought, "Is this as good as it's going to get?" It's as good as it's going to get. I like this woman. She likes me. Yes, she might try and poison me. Yes, her pimp might be chasing me around America, but that's okay. We'll carry on.
But also when he was a child, because you describe his whole life and he recounts it, and he is constantly chasing women, and then when he has them, he doesn't really know what to do with them. He cheats and he goes up to other women again. He has to move all the time.
Yeah, that's true. I did actually get into the conversation to try and understand this with him a lot, because I did pose several questions like, why do you keep getting married? Explain to me why you keep getting married when you know what your personality traits are that you will ultimately self-destruct. And he said, well, I go into these marriages with willingness. The intention is to be attentive. The intention is to be this perfect husband. And for a long time in some of these relationships, he did just that. He said, I could, go shopping, I could go to the movies and be the perfect husband. But there was the other side of me that, when I saw someone that I liked the look of in a bar and I was on my own, I could just go that way. And he said, that's just how I am.
The most serious relationship I think that he has, or at least that stems from the book, is the one that he made his billions with, or his millions with during the McAfee, who said at some point you're going to rent an office space, and then she wanted to have the rich people's lifestyle. Yeah. Were you ever in touch with, what was her name again?
Well, I didn't name her in the book, so the names were changed. I was like, what was her name? The names were changed. No, I wasn't in touch with any of the ex-wives. Intentionally, actually. I didn't really want to get into that too much, but it was a little bit complicated. But yeah, you're right. This was a situation where John ended up as this corporate guy. This business had grown up around him. He had no intention of doing it. He wanted to leave. His wife was very happy in the corporate life, going to charity dinners, etc. And that ultimately ended the relationship because he didn't want to do it. And that's when he went to create a yoga retreat in Colorado, as you do when your marriage isn't working. So, but that's just what John did.
But that's another crazy part. I mean, you can recognize that you have an idea, a thought, and then abandon that idea again, and then have another thought, another idea. That could happen on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. But what he did was he had an idea, and he implemented it fully, and then he abandoned it.
Yeah.
And he did it not once, twice, but he set up huge things, like this jet ski thing, and this flying
aero
tracking thing, and this yoga thing. It's amazing. And all these things were
He's obsessive about something and then abandons it.
Yeah, but fully implementing first.
Yeah, all of these things were his life.
All of these are big projects.
Yeah, they were his life until they weren't his life. That was it. He threw everything into it, and that includes Belize, where he got into plant research to make antiseptics and everything. This was going to be the next thing. This was going to be my business forever type of thing. Then all of a sudden it's finished.
Incredible story. So this is perhaps not everyone who watches this knows this, but at some point, so McAfee makes fortunes in the tech industry. Then he starts yoga retreats. Then he starts in one-person airplanes, super small, 3 or 4 meters above the ground. You can travel across
90 miles an hour.
90 miles an hour. That would be how many kilometers? That'd be
over 100.
130, 140.
Yeah, extremely dangerous is all you need to know.
The most dangerous sports in the world.
Yeah.
And then he abandons that because his nephew has an accident, very unfortunate. And then he moves to Belize, where he likes the climate, and he sets up a laboratory for an alternative to antibiotics.
Yeah.
So a means to help your body through natural herbs and stuff to attack viruses and bacteria in a way that he says is a complete breakthrough in
quorum
history
sensing
of
called.
medicine.
And all these things are viable.
And
There's no bullshit. There's serious businesses. And some of them extremely successful. And then he abandons it again.
and then the whole laboratory is forgotten, and he moves on to something. It's really this is probably the most dangerous and most incredible life I've ever come across, and I find it really, really sad that he's not around to share this table with us.
Yeah, me too. I mean, one thing I do know is that talking to John for the period of time that I did, I enjoyed the conversations to the extent that at no point did it particularly feel like work. I mean, my job is to write books, but I really enjoyed going up to my office and hearing Mr. McAfee laughing at the top of his voice, which he spent a lot of time doing. There was a lot of laughter, and had he been sitting around this table with us, it would have been a lot of fun, and I really wish he still was.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I just wanted to ask a couple of more questions, but
sure,
because there's an element in the book that is touched upon once or twice, but not really pursued. But McAfee was a pioneer of cryptocurrency.
Yeah,
and I keep going back to the idea that he was at some point a Secret Service agent, and he understood things about the world and the way in which the computer world was heading, but also the financial world, I think. And we're now in the beginning of what I think is the proper collapse of the financial system, or at least the signs are there.
Signs are there, yeah.
And he foresaw that too.
Yeah.
He understood all these processes, I think.
I think this is a theme with John. Lots of people called John sort of paranoid. They said, "Oh, you worried about viruses, and you worried about being busted by, the government in Belize, and you worried about crypto, and you worried about cybersecurity, And he said, well, yeah, all these things happened. Everything that John worried about and everything that John foresaw came to be. And that includes the financial predicament we're in now, whereby there is an inevitability about crypto and the way that that's going. And governments are in what appears to be full panic mode in terms of how do we address this? Is this something we're going to have to adopt and create our own sort of coin system? Can that even be policed?
Yep.
Meanwhile, you've got people who are out there saying, well, this genie is out of the bottle already, and we're going to use it, and there's nothing that can be done about it. And John saw all of this. Back in 2016 or 17, he was saying Bitcoin is inevitable. There is nothing that can stop this. No government can stop it.
Did you also ever discuss with John about Ross Ulbricht and the Silk Road?
We did not. And unfortunately, this is one of the things about this book. There were so many things that we would have loved to have discussed, and people always ask me, why didn't you talk to John about this, talk to John about that? There just weren't enough hours, and the intention was to keep talking. That would have been great if the original book plan had continued, and I'm sure we would have got into some of these areas, but we just never got there. And I had to focus on making sure I had a narrative to make the book that we got and make it as balanced as I could.
And you weren't really in the position to set the agenda either. I
think as much as
him.
I tried.
But I think you really succeeded in making it a balanced book, and it's just an incredible read. And we have there's one of the things, he's such a masculine figure, but when I look at his eyes, I see a tremendous femininity and a perceptiveness, a real openness in his eyes that is unique, I think. We have a few images. This is the moment when he has abandoned the laboratory in Belize with all the brilliant medicines, because he's accused of having committed a crime, and he's in trouble with the Belize government, and he flees to Guatemala. And then some douchebag from Vice magazine betrays his location because he posts a picture with the metadata not erased, and he's sort of unclear whether he was just looking for attention or he was genuinely stupid. And then McAfee does an incredible thing. because they're in a taxi, and the taxi driver is starting to panic, and because he understands that they now have 10 fingers and they may have only 2 left in a couple of hours. But he puts on the Rolling Stones and he starts singing with the taxi driver, who doesn't speak a single word of English, and there are video images of that. And so all of a sudden he creates a party in the middle of this life-threatening situation.
Going back to the eyes, it's quite an interesting point you mentioned to me. I saw that warmth. I don't want to say it was an effeminate type appearance that he had, but John had a real warmth that made me feel warm towards him. Now, this was in contrast to the sort of other visual aspects of John, which were quite macho. I mean, John was well-built, guns, dyed hair, the goatee beard, sunglasses, all of that projected quite a macho image. But the eyes were very delicate. And when we were talking to each other on Skype, which we were, sometimes he had glasses on, sometimes he had glasses off. When his eyes were looking at you, you definitely, it kind of melted me a little bit it disarmed me in a way that made me feel really fond of him, which obviously I was anyway because of the relationship we had, but those eyes were definitely something.
But incredible the energy and the spirit that he maintains even in such a situation.
Yeah, I mean, this regardless of how much duress he was under, John was always living the wild life.
And of course, the escape ultimately was also incredible, because he had a former girlfriend whose father had been in the previous government or something, and he pays him $100,000 cash. Yeah. And then he gets a private plane, and he's escorted as a hero from this corrupt Central American country. It's just absolutely amazing.
But isn't this the ultimate freedom this guy represents?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the life everyone would love to lead, but never dare to do it. It's such an amazing adventure, this guy. He lived a dozen lives, basically.
Yeah. At least a dozen, yeah.
So when you read through that, it's tiring just to think about it, doing all these things in a row.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that he got 75 years old it's 250 years. It's
250
it's crazy.
years.
Yeah, and from that sense, I think that it also makes you very reflective of your own life. So while reading it, I was thinking, shit, if he's able to do this, what are we capable of doing? Mm-hmm. If we would really spend our life to live something that's more exclusive, more... so in that sense, it really touched me. Yeah. Because it made me feel like I'm really boring.
Yeah, it's true.
What do I do here in the Netherlands? I'm just a simple teacher here.
We're zombies, basically.
We're boring. Yeah.
No, but I think it energizes you. It gives you some impulse to change something about your life.
Yeah, and to make decisions that are perhaps the kind of decisions you wouldn't make normally, whether it be business, personal, whatever it is. You think of something, you might think about, can I implement this? Let's just do it.
I also like the fact that that when he's talking about the bosses he's had, that he's calling them just dumpheads and fuck them, I will do this, I will do that.
Yeah, I mean, John knew how to walk into situations, and there is a great story when he was asked to go down to Brazil to basically implement a program for a telecoms company, and the office was asked, who speaks Portuguese? McAfee puts his hand up and says, yep, I do. Goes down to Brazil, walks into his first meeting and says, now, there is a problem here, and the problem is that none of you speak English. And from this day forward, therefore, all of you will only speak English, and in addition to that, I will only come in to the office. I cannot work in an office environment for one reason or another, and it is imperative that you understand that this is how I work. But I will come in every second Friday if required for meetings, etc., and basically walks out, having slapped down a sheet of A4 paper on the desk and said, "There's your program." John had this way of walking into any business situation and quickly sizing up what the situation was and adapting himself to it, and he did it everywhere he went. It was fantastic.
Yeah, but it was valuable. The thing that he put on the table was really the roadmap that they followed for the rest of the time.
Yeah, and that's the key. I mean, lots of people have that kind of attitude where they walk into a situation and try and control it, but not everybody actually does the job as well. The important thing is that John always did the job because he was a genius. He knew how to do these programs. So he had license to walk into these situations, and these people who were employing him had no choice. It's basically, do we want to entertain this guy or don't we?
But we were discussing this satellite program.
Yeah,
Tyros, which was in the very early stages of his career. Where he developed a program to actually process data that comes from weather satellites.
Yeah.
And they still use that program.
The same program is still cranking data today.
Yes.
And first implemented in 1979 or something like that.
And written by
Mr. McAfee.
Yeah.
I'm also curious about what John thought of the Silicon Valley type of people.
The which?
The Silicon Valley
people.
Yeah.
I mean, John wasn't a typical Silicon Valley type of guy, but he was there at the beginning. And the point is, he mentioned to me about the importance of drugs in Silicon Valley, and I initially thought it was just like a party atmosphere. There was an aspect of that, but there was actually a function to the drugs that were used in Silicon Valley, and the function was simply to allow people to stay up for 2 days in a row. You know, if you've got important computer stuff that has to be done to a deadline, you're trying to fix a virus or whatever it is you're trying to do, you can't just go home and go to bed and come back in the morning. You have to spend the night in the office, and the only way you can spend the night in the office is by having some kind of stimulant. So that's why the drugs poured into Silicon Valley, and it was helped by the fact that San Francisco was already this kind of hippie place where drugs were pretty prevalent anyway. So this was a cultural movement as well as the sort of dawning of the computer age. That again, John understood all this. He understood it, and when he quit drugs and alcohol, he even used that to his advantage. It's a story we were talking about the other day when he got clean and started meeting people to do business deals who weren't clean. And he was very astute at realizing, let's do business on a Friday night. Let's go to a bar or a restaurant on a Friday night. Let's have a couple of drinks. And he's sitting there stone cold sober, watching whoever it is on the other side of the desk having a few drinks. Let's just talk in an hour or so. And after that hour, when this person's had 6 martinis or whatever, they struck up a deal, which John took back very happily. And this person took back to their boss, and their boss says, "What the hell did we sign here?" So John understood exactly how to play every situation, sober or otherwise.
Yeah, and all these are instances, these are examples of how to live your life in a completely different way from what the society demands from you, from what the mainstream is doing. And perhaps that's also, in a way, how he reached his end. And I think it's fitting, in a way, that if he did commit suicide, that he took matters in his own hand, that he wouldn't have died in any other way than from his own decision.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you live your life on your own terms, I guess you want to end your life on your own terms.
Yeah.
Is that not the ultimate freedom? I mean, the idea of being shunted back to the US, put in a prison, left to rot there with no means of communicating with the world, which was important to him. I don't think John would have wanted that. I think John would have wanted, to control his own destiny. He always had until then. That's why my belief is that he took it into his own hands.
But the family is still hesitant about that, I understand.
Well, his wife, Janice, is. His daughter and the family back in the US, I think, believe he committed suicide. That's my understanding. But Janice, his wife, is adamant that didn't happen.
Yeah. And that he was Epsteined.
Yeah.
In any case, he did die in a Spanish cell near Barcelona.
Yep.
Turns out that during most of your conversations, he was actually hiding very nearby Barcelona, which was odd, because he projected the image that he was on the run all the time.
Yeah.
And apparently he was staying at a friend's house very near Barcelona.
Yeah, this was a place called the Bitcoin Hotel, it's now been called. This was a out-of-service hotel on the beach, once owned by a Russian businessman who had mounted a giant laser on the roof. Now, this was for a specific reason, because as it turned out after John's death, there was a Bitcoin mining operation in the parking garage of this hotel. And Bitcoin mining churns through massive amount of electricity. And the only way they could explain this electricity use was by saying, well, we have a laser on the roof there. Obviously, that's why it's costing so much money. So this was all specifically done. But I didn't know any of this at all. John never told me where he was, although he did say to me on one occasion that you'll have to come and visit me. But all I ever saw in the background was that he was, I worked out by the time zone, he was clearly on the same daylight hours as I was. He was clearly near the sea. But I always found it quite strange that John wasn't particularly careful with his location.
Yeah.
He posted stuff on social media, and this was ultimately his downfall. Posted pictures in a restaurant or his home of a particular type of mineral water that was on the table in his home. And of course, some internet sleuth went straight to that and said, oh, this is only available in such and such grocery store in Barcelona type of thing. And all of a sudden, you shrink your world hugely. And before you know it, who was pursuing him was closing in, but it was only a matter of weeks afterwards that he was captured.
But he was called on the airport.
He was boarding a flight to Istanbul for reasons I know not, with a British passport.
But because he was sought for tax evasion, essentially.
Yeah,
that's the Capone thing. Huh?
Yeah, the Al Capone trick and basically what he says in the book is that he was severely disliked by deep state types. He had been disliked for many years, and then finally they. Maybe that was also a way of self-aggrandizing, because how sought after was he really? I mean,
that was the question I always asked. It was, you say people are pursuing you, but actually are they?
Yeah.
It was always uncertain. Even throughout, you wondered whether John just liked the idea that people wanted to find him, and that actually nobody was looking for him at all. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. And obviously, the tax issues that he had, ultimately they're going to come after you and they're going to find you, particularly when you're a public figure like he was and was making very public announcements about how not to pay tax. That's going to get you problems. But it does seem strange to me even now that there would be that much reason to go chasing after John McAfee. It doesn't really make that much sense. And I was always wondering, is this real?
Yeah. Yeah, which in the end is also a kind of question that pushes you to the John McAfee way of life, because you can also ask yourself, how important is it if it's real?
It's a great point.
It's a thought. It's a possibility. It's a fantasy. It's an imagination, and we are such stuff as dreams are made on. This is a life. This is a way to feel life.
Yeah, I have to say, as a writer, there was part of me that really worried about that for a while. Is this real? Is it not? Am I presenting something that is deceptive or whatever? And there was a review that came out in the Washington Examiner quite soon after the US edition came out, where somebody really captured what I wanted to feel. And he said, this is the only book that could ever have been written about John McAfee. And in the end, it doesn't matter what's true and what isn't. And that just made me say, yeah, you're right. It just doesn't matter.
Yes.
And I think that is another example.
You surrender to him.
Yeah, it's another example of freedom.
Yes.
You're just saying, okay, truth doesn't even matter in this story. And I think that's exactly how John would have wanted it.
Yeah.
To leave people wondering, what was that life?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it took the pressure off me.
And also, in general, this is being sometimes I'm a politician, and there's a culture of literal interpretation of everything. And then they'll some newspaper interviewer thinks he's really, really clever because he or she found that 5 years ago you said, I don't know, I don't drink coffee with milk, whatever. And then they'll say, but you said that 5 years ago. Is it true or is it not true? Tell me, yes or no. Your voters have a right to know. And this is a culture that is very predominant now across with all the inclusivity and you have to apologize for every joke you make, and we live in an increasingly literal world, right?
It's called gotcha culture.
It's gotcha culture.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. See, we got you on that.
Yeah, and by his whole universe distances from that. Yeah. And he says something, and then the next day he says, "Well, maybe I said that, but today I'll say something else." And this is liberty, the kind of liberty we're completely losing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but another thing, quite another subject, I think, is that he could see through things for which were not yet any concepts. So he was already thinking about security, cybersecurity, that sort of thing, before the whole paradigm around that subject was formed. And the same goes for viruses, the risks of viruses. That whole world didn't have any structure yet, and he could see through that. And as soon as it got some structure, he was bored and he moved on. And so I wanted to move to the NFT subject, because I think that's a typical subject where there's not yet a concept, there's not yet a full understanding. It would have been ideal for John to be a part of that. Of course, he understood all the technology behind it. But we compared it in the car. I said, I was in Rabobank a long time ago responsible for setting up the website, rabobank.nl, which at the time meant nothing. It was pure...
One page.
One page. And many people said, okay, but what's the use of this? I mean, why would you set that up? It was part of the wizardry in the early 90s. We were very, very early at the time. And now it's the only thing left. That's website, URLs. And I see NFTs as something comparable. Now you say, what the hell would you do with an NFT? And he would be able to see through that and say, wait a minute, this is a comparable start of a completely new concept, completely new structures that we can't fathom yet, or perhaps partly. But he would be able to do that.
Yeah, and he had already done it with cryptocurrency in a way. John was an ideologue in the sense that he loved the idea of something, and as you say, could see through the process somewhat to the end. And I think the NFT part of things is fascinating to me specifically, because we're in the early stages of it. And I don't think it's helpful to say we don't know what the answers are, because that's how things are. You need to go through a journey with something, as we did with websites, to the point where they're now. I mean, I remember at the beginning of websites, people would say, "So can I see this page in another country?"
Exactly.
We just didn't really understand that. Somebody could have a screen on in Scotland, and you could be looking at the same page in Holland. But now that is unthinkable. And I think we're at that stage with NFTs and such. And somebody in the States who I've worked with on this kind of thing tried to explain it to me and said, think of this as the Beatles. This is the Beatles playing in a club in Liverpool to 8 people and a dog, and we're trying to get it to the place where they're playing Shea Stadium in front of 100,000 people. We don't know what that journey involves. How do we get there? But we just know that journey is there.
But he would definitely have been enthusiastic about what we're trying to do with the publishing house and launching NFTs as a means to stay in touch. Yeah. Because that's one of the things that we're doing. Judd Wise, who was this is something we haven't talked about, but at some point in his life, John McAfee was actually an American presidential candidate, and his running mate, Judd Wise, is a photographer, and he made available his collection of pictures, private pictures that he took from John McAfee to us to make NFTs. That's what Chhay is doing for our company, and you're involved in that as well as an author. And if people if they acquire an NFT, they will be invited to a Telegram group, a closed Telegram group, where you as an author can post things, where they'll be invited for several follow-up meetings and so on. So it's really a community of readers, of enthusiasts of John McAfee, and it's a way to increase the contact between writer, author, subject, and audience.
Yeah, I think that's true, and by doing something like that, you're adding value to something that isn't fully understood by people in terms of what the item is. An NFT for some people, a lot of people think it's just a GIF or an image or whatever. But there is more value to it. There is a signaling aspect to it, whereby you're saying, we're going down this path. We don't know where the path is going, but we're going down it. And by being part of that club, you're holding your hand up and saying, I'm in this club. Yeah. And not only that, this is a legitimate club and will be a club. This Telegram channel, think of it like an insider group for McAfee and all things related to the McAfee tapes book. Any developments there are in the story, anything that's happening, there is a movie happening separately, any up-to-date information about what's happening there, you will only get that in this group. And I think it's a great way of creating a community for the McAfee stuff with a product on the side.
Yeah. And I think this book should be made into a play, a theater play. because I think John McAfee in hiding, telling his story to some author somewhere in Scotland, and then on the other half of the stage you see scenes of his life being replayed by the small John McAfee, the older John McAfee. You see several stages of his life by several actors. I think that would be an amazing evening in the theater.
I think your phone is going to ring after this podcast from people who want to do it.
Yeah, I really hope that will happen. And I'm really, in a way, I was sad when the book came out, because when I had finished it, because it's just something that you want to return to all the time. It's a very, very special book. You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
I hope that people who've watched this will read it. It's available in Dutch and also in English. Mark, congratulations on this.
Thanks very much.
Phenomenal work.
Without John, it doesn't exist.
That is true. So most praise to John, but also
Excellent.
to you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. And so this was the very first podcast of Amsterdam Books in the kitchen where it all happens. It was an experiment. I really enjoyed doing it. But we're going to do more. We're going to do other kinds of podcasts. We're going to have other guests, of course. And if you liked this video, if you enjoyed it, subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends, and let us know in the comments what you think. Thank you very much once again for watching, and all very best.